The Middletons, who have long taken pride in their modesty and discretion, arrived at the family celebration bearing a handmade jewelry box and a traditional red envelope, a learning gift, as they called it, meant to teach their granddaughter the value of saving, giving, and spending wisely. Inside the envelope was a modest sum of pocket money, accompanied by a note from Michael that read, "For moments of kindness, spend it on others as much as yourself." To the untrained eye, it was an innocent, thoughtful gesture. But to Queen Camilla, witnesses say, it was something else entirely, an affront to royal decorum, a reminder that the Middletons were not of noble blood. According to one source present in the green drawing room, Camilla's expression tightened immediately as Charlotte unwrapped the gift. Within moments, the queen consort allegedly muttered to an aide, loud enough for nearby guests to overhear, "How very provincial. Teaching allowances at Windsor next, will be selling souvenirs." The remark, cutting and unmistakable, fell like glass on marble. Catherine, who had been laughing moments before, froze. Her mother, Carol, attempted to smile politely, while Michael Middleton merely adjusted his glasses and remained silent, the same composed restraint that has defined his life, both in and outside the royal orbit. But the exchange didn't end there. Witnesses claim Camilla continued, turning toward the king with a half-smile. "I suppose some habits never change, Your Majesty. Once a shopkeeper, always a shopkeeper." The air in the room evaporated. For years, palace insiders have known that the relationship between Camilla and the Middletons was frosty but manageable, a polite détente held together by Catherine's grace and William's quiet diplomacy. Yet this time, the line had been crossed, not because of what was said, but because of where and when it was said. During a family celebration, in front of staff, aides, and children, King Charles, who had been seated nearby with a glass of elderflower cordial, reportedly placed it down slowly and broke the silence with a measured but unmistakable rebuke. "Enough, Camilla," he said. "They have given this family far more than money ever could." That sentence, short, regal, and final, shifted the mood instantly. Michael Middleton, ever the gentleman, bowed his head slightly. Catherine placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. William's eyes, witnesses recall, were fixed on his stepmother, unblinking, calm, but icy. It was not the first time Camilla's tone had betrayed irritation toward the Middletons, but never had it been so public, so cruelly timed. By evening, what should have been a serene royal milestone had turned into a symbol of the monarchy's deepest divide. The clash between privilege and principle, between inherited status and earned respect. Within 24 hours, word of the incident began filtering through palace corridors. A senior aide confirmed that the king was deeply embarrassed by what had transpired and requested an immediate private meeting with Michael Middleton. During that meeting held, fittingly, in the same study where Queen Elizabeth II once conducted her Sunday briefings, the king reportedly expressed personal regret and gratitude, acknowledging that Michael had given the crown a daughter of duty and a future of stability. That single conversation would prove to be the catalyst for a quiet revolution. For years, Charles had resisted the idea of officially recognizing Catherine's parents in any formal capacity. They were respected, certainly, but not royal. Yet that day at Windsor, something changed. In the face of Camilla's arrogance, the king saw something that had long been missing in his court: humility, dignity, and the kind of quiet integrity his late mother, Elizabeth II, had embodied. Behind closed doors, aides say Charles began drafting the framework for a symbolic gesture, one that would not only honor the Middletons, but redefine the meaning of royal service. "I'm saying." As for Camilla, those close to her insist she was merely joking, and that her remarks were taken out of context. But those who were present describe her behavior as condescending and deliberate. In the following days, her public engagements were quietly reduced. Briefing documents began circulating without her signature, and for the first time since her coronation, Camilla's name was absent from the internal planning of the royal summer calendar. The queen consort, once the architect of Charles's inner circle, had been frozen out not by decree, but by consequence. Meanwhile, the Middletons, who had never sought attention, found themselves at the center of a royal reckoning they neither asked for nor expected. Their simple act of giving, born of love, tradition, and modesty, had exposed the quiet fault lines of a palace struggling to reconcile its image with its conscience. In the words of one court historian, it was more than a birthday gift, it was a mirror, and in that reflection, the crown saw who truly carried its values and who merely wore its jewels. The days that followed would reshape the monarchy's inner map, elevating Michael Middleton from quiet father-in-law to moral advisor of the next sovereign, while marking the beginning of Queen Camilla's slow, public unraveling. But on that May afternoon, It all began with one envelope, one insult, and one king who finally decided enough was enough. The incident at Windsor Castle lingered like a bruise beneath the royal facade, invisible to the cameras, impossible to ignore within the corridors of power. What had begun as a thoughtless insult at Princess Charlotte's birthday had now evolved into something far more consequential, a turning point in the moral direction of the crown itself. In the 48 hours that followed, King Charles III withdrew from all public duties, citing private family reflection. But those close to him knew the truth. Behind closed doors, the monarch was drafting what aides later described as an act of quiet correction, a gesture that would both heal the wounds inflicted by Camilla's arrogance and redefine the balance of influence within the royal household. By the morning of May 5, the king had made his decision. In the small, oak-paneled study once used by Queen Elizabeth II for her Sunday audiences, Charles summoned Michael Middleton for a private meeting. There were no photographers, no ceremonial introductions, no gilded chairs, only 2 cups of tea, a simple handshake, and an air thick with unspoken emotion. According to palace sources, Charles began the meeting by expressing his deep regret for what had transpired during Charlotte's birthday celebration. "You've shown this family a dignity that many born into it often forget," he reportedly told Michael. "Your steadiness, your restraint, are qualities this institution cannot afford to lose." What followed was a conversation that would quietly alter royal protocol. The king, in an unprecedented move, offered Michael Middleton an honorary advisory position, a personal, confidential role designed to support Prince William during his future reign. No title, no stipend, no public ceremony, but immense significance. Palace insiders later referred to it as the appointment that rebalanced the monarchy. It was, in essence, Charles's acknowledgement that the future of the crown would not rest on bloodline alone, it would rest on values. Michael, true to his nature, declined the offer at first, saying that his only duty was to his daughter and grandchildren, but the king insisted. "This isn't about rank," Charles said. "It's about steadiness. William needs someone who speaks with wisdom, not ambition." That was the moment, according to one aide, when Michael finally accepted quietly, humbly, without flourish. Within days, a confidential letter was circulated among senior courtiers and advisors, notifying them of the king's personal intention to consult Mr. Michael Middleton on matters concerning the Prince of Wales's transition and future household structure. It was the closest thing to an official decree without the trappings of one. And though the public would not know it for weeks, the appointment was a message one Charles knew would echo through every drawing room from Kensington to Clarence House. The Middletons were no longer peripheral. They were now part of the royal equation. Meanwhile, Camilla's fury was quietly mounting. Sources at Clarence House described her as humiliated and betrayed. For years, she had worked to secure a respectable public image, nurturing alliances among the aristocracy, rebuilding her reputation from the ashes of Diana's tragedy. But now, all of that seemed to crumble in a single stroke of royal penmanship. The Queen Consort had spent months lobbying Charles to appoint her son, Tom Parker Bowles, to a similar advisory post, arguing that his understanding of the public, media, and heritage made him ideal to support William. The king had refused 3 times, each rejection sharper than the last. When she learned that Michael Middleton had been chosen instead, insiders say Camilla left the room in tears. One aide described her reaction as a moment of genuine heartbreak mixed with fury. Another put it more bluntly. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her influence had reached its limit. In the days that followed, the soft sidelining began. Camilla's name quietly disappeared from key briefings. Her presence at summer engagements was reconsidered. Invitations to certain high-level meetings, including one concerning the future education of Prince George and Princess Charlotte, were rescinded without explanation. It was, as one courtier phrased it, a dethronement of relevance. For William and Catherine, the king's decision felt like both a vindication and a warning. Vindication, because the quiet integrity of their family had finally been recognized. Warning, because the spotlight of royal favor could shift as easily as it had landed. Catherine, ever the diplomat, reached out to her stepmother-in-law in a gesture of reconciliation. She reportedly sent a handwritten note, expressing hope that the day's misunderstandings would not overshadow the years of shared service. There was no reply. Behind the public smiles and ceremonial waves, the palace was entering a new phase of quiet warfare, one not fought with words, but with access, influence, and silence. Charles's choice to elevate Michael Middleton was more than an act of personal gratitude. It was a philosophical statement that character outweighs class and service outweighs status. The Middletons, self-made and scandal-free, represented the stability the monarchy desperately needed. And in elevating them, the king had effectively chosen his legacy, not the queen beside him, but the family who would guide his son beyond him. A senior royal historian later summarized it best. Charles didn't just appoint an advisor, he anointed a value system. The crown has long been guarded by blood now. It is guarded by conscience. But within the palace walls, Camilla was far from finished. Her allies in the aristocracy, including Lord Alton of Belgrave and the Duchess of Penrose, began quietly gathering. Their mission: to remind the king that tradition could not be replaced by middle-class morality. Thus, while Windsor celebrated a new era of inclusion, a countercurrent of resentment began to flow beneath it. The royal family, once unified by the Queen's enduring example, was once again splitting along invisible fault lines, this time not between duty and desire, but between humility and heritage. And as Charles's health waned, the question loomed: would his late life decision heal the monarchy's fractures, or deepen them beyond repair? For now, the king had made his choice. But choices, in the House of Windsor, are rarely without consequence. The king's quiet decision to honor Michael Middleton sent shockwaves through royal and aristocratic circles alike. On the surface, the monarchy projected calm, radiant smiles, seamless ceremonies, cheerful photo calls. But behind the marble walls of Clarence House, a subtler battle had begun to unfold. Queen Camilla's once loyal circle, a mix of titled friends, courtiers, and well-placed allies in the House of Lords, began murmuring their discontent. To them, Charles's gesture was nothing short of heresy, the crown bending to a family of shopkeepers. Lord Alton of Belgrave, Camilla's oldest confidant, was heard complaining at a private dinner. "If we start crowning commoners with influence, we may as well auction the throne on eBay." The remark, though flippant, captured a growing unease among the old guard. They viewed the Middletons not as stabilizers, but as disruptors, proof that the monarchy was drifting toward domestic populism. And at the center of that resentment was Tom Parker Bowles. Tom, who had quietly endured his mother's humiliation, now became the face of a whispered campaign. Within days, sympathetic columnists began publishing subtle critiques of unofficial royal advisors and middle-class meddling. The implication was clear: Michael Middleton's appointment was improper, even dangerous. Camilla herself, though publicly composed, was fueling the effort. Her private secretary arranged discreet meetings with traditionalist peers, urging them to reassert the historical structure of royal council. One memo, later leaked to the press, revealed a chilling phrase scribbled in Camilla's own handwriting: "If Charles will not defend legacy, perhaps legacy must defend itself." Meanwhile, inside Kensington Palace, William and Catherine grew increasingly aware of the shifting winds. A senior aide warned that Camilla's circle was testing loyalties within the institution. Even some long-serving palace staff, especially those loyal to the Queen Consort, since Charles's accession, began quietly withholding information from the Wallis's office. It was not open rebellion. It was worse, a freeze-out. Meetings were accidentally scheduled without the prince and princess's teams. Invitations to state committees were lost in circulation. Minor protocol breaches like the order of precedence at public events began to appear again, always to Catherine's subtle disadvantage. Yet through it all, Michael Middleton remained silent. He continued to advise his daughter and son-in-law privately, never speaking to the press, never rising to the bait. His stoic calm only infuriated Camilla's camp further. As one insider noted, "They cannot outmaneuver a man who refuses to play the game." Oh, King Charles, though weakened by health issues, was not oblivious. When briefed about the brewing tension, he reportedly sighed and said, "It seems we are haunted by old ghosts, titles over truths, appearances over actions." Still, his ability to intervene was waning. Doctors urged rest. Courtiers shielded him from stress. Into that vacuum, factions grew bolder, and the whisper network expanded unseen but effective. By midsummer, Camilla's allies were preparing a quiet petition, urging the king to reconsider the informal advisory arrangement with Michael Middleton. It was symbolic, perhaps futile, but it carried a sting, an open challenge to Charles's authority in the twilight of his reign. For the monarchy, the stakes were clear. Either the new order of humility and merit would prevail, or the old hierarchy, gilded, exclusive, and brittle, would claw its way back from the shadows. And at the center of that fragile balance stood one unassuming man from Berkshire, a father who had once only wanted to protect his daughter, now thrust into a palace war he never asked to fight. By midsummer, the whispers had grown teeth. What began as quiet murmurs in the corridors of Clarence House was now a full-fledged campaign of resistance. Leaks began to seep into the press, each one calibrated to wounds small enough to deny, sharp enough to cut. Tensions behind the throne. Read one tabloid. A new royal favorite emerges, declared another. Insiders knew who was behind it. The fingerprints were unmistakable. The queen consort's circle, once discreet, was now emboldened. Every snub she suffered, every meeting she was excluded from became fuel for her fury. In her private drawing room at Clarence House, Camilla reportedly vented to her inner circle, her voice taut with contempt. They've turned this palace into a marketplace. Values, positions, even influence all sold to the highest virtue signal. Lord Alton nodded gravely, murmuring that the Middletons were never meant to sit so close to the throne. What followed was a meeting of quiet vengeance. The goal was not open confrontation, that would look desperate. The goal was erosion to make William's circle seem naive, to frame Catherine's family as opportunists cloaked in charm. The first strike came through the press. A Sunday column, unattributed but clearly briefed by someone with proximity, questioned the appropriateness of allowing private citizens, however well-intentioned, to influence royal policy. The article mentioned no names, but everyone knew who it targeted. A father-in-law with a quiet office near Windsor, meeting regularly with senior aides. It blurs lines once sacred. The phrase, blurs lines, would appear in 4 more publications within the week. It was no coincidence. Inside Kensington Palace, Catherine's team scrambled to respond. The princess, true to form, refused to issue a statement. Dignity is the answer, she told her communications director. William agreed, but his patience was thinning. My father's decision stands, he said curtly to one advisor. Anyone questioning it is questioning the crown itself. For the first time, William began asserting authority beyond his father's shadow. He summoned the Lord Chamberlain, requesting that palace press coordination be consolidated under his office, to preserve message discipline. It was a polite way of saying, the leaks stop now, but control was already slipping. Camilla's allies doubled down, leaking concerns that the new royal hierarchy with William, Catherine, and Michael Middleton at its center was marginalizing those who had stood by the king in his hardest years. The narrative was carefully crafted. Camilla as the loyal partner unjustly sidelined, the Middletons as smooth interlopers reshaping the monarchy from within. Even among the public, the story found traction. Some traditionalists lamented the disappearance of royal mystique. Others, especially younger Britons, saw the opposite, a monarchy finally evolving. Better the people who earned respect than those who inherited it. Read one viral tweet with over 1 million likes. Inside the palace, the divide was no longer invisible. Seating charts changed. Invitations were rescinded. Staff whispered about 2 courts under 1 crown. Catherine's household remained calm, unshaken. But those close to her noticed the toll: sleepless nights, tense meetings. William's jaw set harder than usual. The breaking point came at a private garden reception at Highgrove. Camilla, radiant in silk, approached Catherine during a pause in conversation. According to several witnesses, her voice carried more venom than warmth. It must be comforting, my dear, having your parents run the palace for you. Catherine's reply was instantaneous, calm but razor-edged. It's comforting knowing they've never asked for anything in return. The room froze. Charles, overhearing the exchange, turned sharply toward his wife. The moment passed in silence, but the damage was irreversible. Within hours, aides described the king as visibly shaken and determined to end the feud. That evening, Charles called both households to Windsor for what insiders now call the Long Table Summit. The mood was somber, the stakes immense. At its conclusion, Charles reaffirmed his earlier decree. Michael Middleton's advisory role would stand, and personal grievances will not outweigh the monarchy's duty to example. Camilla said nothing, but her silence, aides later admitted, spoke volumes. By nightfall, the royal household had split in everything but name. 2 factions, 2 visions, 1 crown. And in the eye of the storm, the public had already chosen its side. As one BBC commentator put it, the queen consort may hold the crown, but Catherine's family holds the country's heart. And in Buckingham Palace's echoing halls, that truth was becoming impossible to deny. By late autumn, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace had shifted from tense to brittle. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact in corridors. There were no shouting matches, no grand declarations, only the kind of silence that settles when power quietly changes hands. The queen consort, once the unchallenged architect of King Charles's court, now found herself increasingly isolated. Her calendar, once filled with public engagements and diplomatic dinners, was reduced to a scattering of charity events and private luncheons. Even those were described by one aide as token appearances more ceremonial than strategic. The press, once sympathetic to her narrative of perseverance and redemption, began to turn. Headlines grew cooler, tone shifting from reverence to scrutiny. The consort in question, read a Sunday editorial. Another was more direct, Camilla's silence grows louder. Behind the scenes, the king's patience had reached its quiet limit. While he refused to publicly rebuke his wife, insiders say Charles had become resolute but weary, determined to protect the institution from internal rot. His health was fluctuating, and the burden of monarchy had begun to manifest in measured decisions rather than emotional ones. The final break came not from an argument, but from a briefing document, an innocuous-looking folder left on the king's desk one winter morning. Inside were summaries of public sentiment surveys, prepared by the Royal Communications Office. The data was staggering. Asterisk, 81% of respondents viewed Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the moral center of the monarchy. Asterisk, 74% approved of the king's recognition of Michael Middleton. Asterisk, only 28% expressed continued confidence in Queen Camilla's public role. For a monarch whose entire reign had been built on public rehabilitation, the numbers were undeniable. That evening, during a small family dinner at Windsor, Charles addressed the issue directly. Aides say his tone was calm, but absolute. "The people see sincerity where they once saw spectacle," he told Camilla. "And perhaps they are right." Camilla's response was not explosive. It was, as one eyewitness put it, a heartbreak that looked like pride. She accused the king of allowing sentimentality to rewrite hierarchy. She reminded him of her decades of loyalty, her survival through scandal, her years of silence under scrutiny. But Charles only nodded, replying quietly, "You've endured much, but endurance alone cannot define legacy." Within a week, subtle but unmistakable changes were enacted. Camilla's future travel schedule was temporarily suspended pending reassessment. The consort's communications staff were merged into the broader royal office under William's oversight. And, most tellingly, her name was removed from several Commonwealth committees she had once chaired. The Queen Consort was not exiled, not humiliated, simply phased out. The move was as calculated as it was compassionate. Charles understood that direct punishment would fracture the monarchy. Instead, he allowed time, protocol, and public favor to do the work. Each week that passed, Catherine's influence grew while Camilla's relevance waned. Catherine, for her part, maintained dignity throughout. She refused to gloat, refused to leak, refused to so much as acknowledge her stepmother-in-law's downfall. Instead, she focused on the crown's next chapter, expanding the Royal Early Childhood Foundation, drafting a new educational partnership with the Commonwealth, and ensuring her parents' quiet inclusion at official family events. Michael Middleton continued his role as a silent pillar, offering advice when asked, disappearing when not. In private, aides say the king often quoted him, "Steady hands build long bridges." Charles once told William a phrase that had apparently come from Michael himself. Meanwhile, Camilla's allies Lord Alton, the Duchess of Penrose, and a handful of loyal courtiers found their influence evaporating. Invitations dried up, their calls went unanswered. Within royal hierarchy, power does not die in public. It fades in private, replaced by new voices, new faces, new energy. By December, the transformation was complete. The monarchy had been reset not through decree, but through quiet correction. The image that captured the shift came on Christmas Eve. The royal family gathered for a public service at St. George's Chapel. Catherine, radiant in emerald green, walked alongside her parents, who were seated directly behind the king and Prince William. Camilla arrived moments later, escorted by aides, her placement subtly altered, no longer beside the king, but one row behind. It was protocol disguised as symbolism, and everyone noticed. The headlines the next morning were merciless: a new center of gravity. The Middletons rise, the consort recedes. Inside the palace, no one dared discuss it openly, but the meaning was clear. The monarchy's emotional axis had shifted for good. Camilla still held her title, her jewels, her ceremonial duties, but the power she once wielded, the influence she had fought decades to secure, now belonged elsewhere to a family who had never asked for it, yet embodied it effortlessly. As one court historian later wrote, "The fall of a consort is never loud. It is a silence that grows until history stops calling her name. I miss." And in that silence, a new monarchy, humble, human, and quietly reformed, began to take its place. By the dawn of the new year, a different atmosphere hung over Windsor. The air was still crisp with winter, but the tone of the monarchy had softened, less about grandeur, more about grounding. The transformation was subtle but visible in every detail. Fewer motorcades, simpler receptions, warmer smiles from faces that had once seemed carved in porcelain. The reign of the people's crown had begun. King Charles III, aged but alert, addressed his senior advisors in the first week of January, with a clarity that surprised even his doctors. "We cannot inherit the past," he said, "if we do not earn the present." His new initiative, formally titled the Renewal Charter, was unveiled in a quiet briefing to palace staff. It laid out a vision for a monarchy built on transparency, frugality, and merit principles, inspired not by lords or courtiers, but by the family his late mother had once affectionately called the Middletons of Bucklebury. The charter's first clause was unmistakable in intent. Royal privilege shall serve public purpose. Private security expenditures would be cut by 30%. Unused estates would be converted into public heritage centers. And, in a move that sent ripples through every noble house in Britain, royal funding for extended relatives, particularly those without direct constitutional duties, would cease entirely. The decision, though framed as modernization, was a direct continuation of the quiet revolution that began at Charlotte's birthday months earlier. What had started as a defense of dignity had evolved into a doctrine. For William, now serving as de facto regent during his father's convalescence, the message was clear. The crown would no longer be a fortress of privilege, it would be a mirror of responsibility. Catherine, ever the calm architect behind her husband's public poise, shaped the public rollout with surgical precision. Press statements highlighted continuity with Queen Elizabeth II's legacy of service. Every announcement was wrapped not in rebellion but in reverence. And beside them, quietly as ever, stood Michael Middleton, the man who had come to embody the monarchy's rediscovered moral compass. His presence was never theatrical, his influence never declared. But those who observed him closely could see it. The gentle hand guiding the heir toward stability, the grounded wisdom of a man who had lived outside the palace walls, yet understood its weight better than anyone inside. The British public responded with unprecedented warmth. Polls soared. Approval ratings for the monarchy reached levels not seen since the early years of Elizabeth's reign. Commentators coined a new phrase for the age, the Middleton Standard. It described a set of values now associated with the royal household: restraint, honesty, and empathy. Meanwhile, Camilla's retreat into the background became almost complete. Though she retained her title as queen consort, she appeared increasingly detached from public life. Her allies in the aristocracy found no audience for their grievances. Time had moved on, and so had the people. One particularly poignant moment came during the Commonwealth Day service that spring. Catherine stood to deliver a speech on unity through humility, crediting her parents for teaching her that service is not a station, it's a state of mind. As she spoke, cameras captured Michael and Carol Middleton, seated quietly in the front pews. The applause that followed wasn't merely for the princess. It was for the journey, the improbable rise of a family who had turned ordinary decency into royal philosophy. In that same week, Charles made what many believed to be his final significant proclamation as king. In a televised address, short, solemn, and deeply human, he said, "The strength of a crown is not measured in the gold that surrounds it, but in the hands that carry it forward. And those hands must belong to those who understand both duty and grace." It was both a blessing and a farewell. Within weeks, the king began delegating almost all state matters to Prince William. Insiders spoke of a planned continuity, not an abdication, but a transition written in love. The monarchy was no longer merely surviving scandal. It was redefining survival itself through credibility, empathy, and conscience. As one historian noted in the Times, "For centuries, the British monarchy has been shielded by wealth and tradition. Now, for the first time, it is protected by character." In the final family photograph of that spring, taken on the lawns of Windsor Castle King, Charles sat beside William, Catherine, and their 3 children. Michael and Carol stood just behind them, smiling softly, unadorned but unmistakably central. Absent from the frame was Camilla. The photo would later appear on the cover of newspapers around the world under a single headline: "The Crown Reborn." It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a redefinition of royalty itself. The monarchy had found its humanity again, not through decree or dynasty, but through the quiet example of a family who believed that integrity, once earned, could reign longer than any crown. And as the bells of Westminster rang that day, echoing across a nation once divided in doubt, the story of the Middletons and the values they had brought into the heart of the British monarchy became more than a royal tale. It became the future,